Hi everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Deploying and Operating Your OpenStack Cloud with Ansible, presented by Walter Bensley. Please feel free to submit any questions at any time using the chat feature. All questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Walter to begin.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? First off, I want to say thank you for joining us to learn a little bit more about deploying and operating your OpenStack Clouds with Ansible. Again, my name is Walter Bentley. This is just a little bit of information about me and how you can contact me if you're interested or if you have any further questions after the webinar. I can always be reached on Twitter pretty easily, and as well as there's my blog that a lot of times I release a lot of information very similar to what I'm going to kind of present today to you guys. But again, I've been in IT for over 17 years. I just moved to Texas, but I'm a native New Yorker. And OpenStack happens to be something near and dear to my heart, as well as Ansible has become something that I spend a lot of time doing and helping customers to kind of put together ways of operating their OpenStack clouds using Ansible. So this is just some more details about me, but I guess we're going to just kind of move forward and jump right into some of the meat and potatoes of what we're going to cover today. So this is a very high level of just our talking points that we're going to kind of talk through and review today. We're going to start out talking about deploying OpenStack with Ansible and using that OpenStack Ansible repository that exists out there on GitHub under the main OpenStack repository. It used to be called OSAD, but now it's called OSA, and it'll probably be called something else in a couple months from now. But we're just going to refer to it as OSA for now. We're going to kind of talk through how the OpenStack community adopted this way of deploying OpenStack, some of the features and benefits of it, and then kind of go under the covers of how you actually can use OSA and the things that you have to configure to actually get it to work for you. And then the second part of the webinar, we're going to cover operating your OpenStack Cloud with Ansible. So that big concept of, well, once you have that OpenStack Cloud built, right? Once you get through that very tough task of getting it built, now what do you do? So we're going to just kind of talk through how we can use Ansible to help administer and operate your cloud. Walk through some real-life scenarios. So we're going to actually do some live demo of some real-life scenarios with Ansible and what you can do with Ansible against an OpenStack Cloud. And then at the very end, kind of circle back around and talk through some tips and tricks of both the deploying and of the operating the OpenStack Cloud. So if you guys are ready, we can jump right in and let's get started with talking about deploying OSA. So I love the fact of combining OpenStack and Ansible together. It was a pretty genius idea, and we'll go through the details of how that came about and where we are today. So it all began back in November of 2014, and actually even before then. So Rackspace, we decided that we wanted to try a new method of deploying OpenStack. And we went down the rabbit hole, and we originally were using Chef to do our OpenStack deployment, and that was the method that we were using that came from the community. We decided to kind of cook up something a little bit different. We decided, well, why not be able to use a tool like Ansible, an open source orchestration and automation tool to deploy OpenStack instead of using Chef or Puppet or some of the other methods that existed out there. So we went about it and created this whole series of playbooks and roles and had it sitting in a StackForge repository. And the way that Rackspace looks at things is that we are all about giving back to the community. So instead of making it something proprietary, something that we kept to ourselves, we actually did the exact opposite. We actually put it right out there on StackForge repository on GitHub, and we left it out there for all in the community to be able to leverage. But again, back in that November 2014 time frame, it was around that time that the OpenStack community voted to accept those OSI playbooks as a standard basis for deploying OpenStack using Ansible going forward. So what we had created at Rackspace was now accepted as by the OpenStack community as something that was going to be adopted through the rest of the community as well. So it was over in the past summit where the summit back in Vancouver where the community decided that, you know what, we're fully committed to this process and we want to continue to improve the OpenStack installation process, and they were going to do that using OSAD. So it was around the fall of last year that the OSAD repository was officially moved from the Stack Forge over underneath the main OpenStack repository, and then at that point it was renamed as OSA. So the link to where you can get to that OpenStack, the repository for deploying Ansible, OpenStack using Ansible, is there on the screen, and that's the official location now where you can get that code. So it's no longer under Stack Forge; it's now under the main OpenStack repository. So you may question to yourself, well, why would I choose this method of deploying OpenStack? Well, the first thing I would tell you is that it's easy. To me, it happens to be the easiest approach to being able to deploy OpenStack and the most dependable as far as a repeatable process over and over again. But some of the other benefits and features that OSA does offer to you is the fact that, number one, it is using Ansible to deploy the OpenStack. And the reason why I see that as a feature is it's like a 2-for-1. So you're getting an ability to deploy OpenStack, but you're also getting the ability to learn a new and mainly broad community-driven orchestration and automation tool, which is called Ansible. And if you've never heard of Ansible, I definitely would I would encourage you to investigate it further. It actually is Ansible has now fallen under the Red Hat umbrella, and it's a very strong path and has a very strong community. So using OSA, you get a 2-for-1. You get OpenStack and you get Ansible knowledge. OSA deploys the OpenStack services in LXC containers, and the reason why the idea of deploying those services inside of containers instead of having them just run on the bare metal OS was in reference of thinking about future upgrades, right? The ability to be able to upgrade in place is what this having those services and containers gives you. And it's not Docker container, to be clear. It is LXC, which is the original container format that is part of the Ubuntu platform. So that's one of the main features and benefits. So you can actually swap out OpenStack services in real time, as well as add additional containers if you have additional load on your systems and you need more containers to support, whether your Nova APIs or your Keystone APIs, right? So it gives you ultimate flexibility in that realm. The next feature and benefit is the fact that it was not built to use the standard OVM, which is a standard networking capability. Instead, OSA uses Linux Bridge Agent. And what that Linux Bridge Agent gives you is it gives you the capability of tapping into the raw OS's network capabilities, right? So you now have the ability to do layer 2 and layer 3 type networks because Linux Bridge is obviously something that's been trial and tested as true. It's been around for a lot longer, and it has tight integration to the operating system, right? And it also does well under load. So we found that going with Linux Bridge gave us a much more stronger approach and platform, something that you can consider to be production ready. And that's what Rackspace's goal was, to make sure that the OpenStack deployment would be production ready, being able to take production load if needed. Another feature of OSA that I would say that I think was a great advantage was the fact that you will get a fully deployed Neutron service, right? So no longer dealing with Nova networking, right? You will get a fully deployed, fully working Neutron installation, and again, where you can leverage whether it be layer 2, which is VLANs, or layer 3, which is VXLAN networks, right? So you can actually leverage both of those networks side by side, interchangeably as you wish with OSA. So that's definitely an advantage that I would call out. It includes all production-ready OpenStack services, and what I mean by that statement is that within OpenStack, right, you have the big umbrella, right, or the core services that are described. OSA includes all those core services, and then you know that there are additional services that are either in transition or not exactly production-ready yet, and those services are kind of the outlayer services. So within OSA, you will get the core big umbrella or core services that are adopted, that are being driven by the OpenStack community. And the additional services, while they're not included in OSA, you can absolutely add those in line with your OSA deployment, and they function just as if it was meant to be there, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. So those prod-ready services, of course, are your Keystone, Glance, Nova, Neutron. You have Cinder. Of course, you have Swift, right? And as well as you have Heat, which is also included in OSA. And very fast followers are the Salometer, and of course some additional services that are right around the corner as well. And the thing that I love about OSA is its flexibility around the fact that you can deploy it as an all-in-one, or you can deploy it as a fully distributed multi-node high availability layout. With OSA, there is no limit. You can go in either direction. And that's the difference between that and other deployment methods, is that it is flexible where you can use it for a true test environment, as well as you can use the same repository, the same code to do a fully distributed, production-ready, highly available OpenStack Cloud. The only difference is making changes within your config files, how you set it up. And it really is just that simple. So these are just some of the beginning features and benefits that I grasped around when dealing with OSA, and then I just wanted to share with you guys. Kind of moving on to some of the under-the-cover things around OSA that you would probably want to know before making the next steps to choose OSA to do your OpenStack deployment. So some of the high-level prerequisites around that is that you do have to run Ubuntu 14.04 as an operating system. That is one of the high-level prerequisites and requirements for OSA. There is talk around including other operating systems such as CentOS, but for now, it is Ubuntu 14.04 is the base operating system you would need to be running. The other high-level prerequisites is you need to have SSH client, which is pretty self-explanatory for most Linux platforms. NTP client, which happens to be very important. You wouldn't imagine how important it is to have a time sync across your cloud. It's actually a very important piece of the puzzle for OpenStack, so that needs to be there. And you need to have at least Python 2.7 or later running on your operating system, which again should not be a struggle for most people running Linux. Some of the features are direct things that are related to the networking. There is a specific networking configuration that is required to run OSA. You need to have these bridges and namespaces that are listed here in order to complete the installation successfully. And the reason why these bridges and namespaces are required is so that you can separate out your network traffic. You can separate out your management, which is basically your API access and API use over your management network. Then you have your networking tunnels, whether it be for your overlay, which is your VXLAN, or whether it be for your direct standard layer 2 network, which is your VLAN. And then there's also an optional network where you can dedicate just for storage. So if you were going to do Cinder and you were connected up to a back-end shared storage device, you would actually have a dedicated network just for your storage traffic. And as well as if you were going to integrate and add a Swift cluster, you can also dedicate that network to be able to just handle the storage network components. Again, I cannot emphasize enough that these network bridges and namespaces, the mandatory ones, are required to finish your OpenStack installation. And we're going to talk more about that, doing the tips and tricks as to making sure these things are in place. Kind of moving on. So the under the covers. So if you were going to deploy OSA, it's basically broken down into 4 main playbooks, Ansible playbooks that are out there on the GitHub repository. Or you can use one playbook, which will basically do everything, which will basically encompass all those 4 playbooks that are listed above. So you can execute the 4 playbooks: the setup host, the HA proxy install, which is actually a install playbook that will install HA proxy and configure all of the bits that are needed to be able to leverage the OpenStack services. And if I didn't mention it before, I have to circle back really quickly and mention it, that the services are meant to be deployed in a way that they are highly available. And what I mean by that is that if you do a multi-node control plane, all of those nodes that are part of the control plane can actually receive API traffic, primarily because you will have something like an HA proxy sitting in front of them or a physical load balancer sitting in front of them. So it was designed to be highly available, right? The platform out the gate was meant to be highly available. And each of those control nodes are being active. If you have 3 control nodes, they'll all be active, right? So you can send traffic to all 3, and then you'll have a load balancer in front to handle where it would send the traffic to which one of those control plane nodes, right? So that's a key feature to remember too, is that you basically have HA built into this if you do a multi-node control plane. set up infrastructure, and then, of course, set up OpenStack, right? So those are your 4 main playbooks that you would need to do the install. And if you don't want to do that, if you just want to, enter one command and walk away, you can do the set up everything, which will include running all 4 of those playbooks that are listed above. And I included a link here directed to the tree where those playbooks reside, and you can definitely take a look at that on your own when you have time. The second piece of the puzzle is that before you actually execute those playbooks, there are 4 configuration files that you need to go in and make specific to how you want your environment to be deployed. And again, this is one of the things that I love about OSID, the fact that you can configure it exactly how you want and keep these configuration files and make changes to them as you want and be able to reference back to them as you need it. And I won't go into too much detail of these configuration files because there's a lot of variables and things you have to adjust. And I have some good examples out there on my GitHub repository, under W. Bentley. Feel free to go out there and check it out. And if you have any specific questions, I can send you a few links to my repository that shows you some really great examples of these configuration files so that you can reference for yourself. But once you get these 4 configuration files all set up, you're able to execute your playbooks. Life is great. Your installation is complete. And now you're actually ready to try and operate your OpenStack Cloud. So this is where you would kind of take a step back and say, well, what approach do I want to take to operating my cloud? Do I want to do things one at a time? Do I want to do things manually? Do I want to go into the Horizon dashboard and click a few buttons? And the thing I always like to kind of share when it comes to cloud is that you want to automate as much as possible. And that's the idea around cloud and why it has become so popular is that the level of automation has been taken to the next level versus when back in our virtualization days where you could automate some things but not most things when it came down to the actual infrastructure. With OpenStack, you have the capability of automating almost everything in reference to how you manage your infrastructure. And so that's what kind of encouraged me to kind of dig a little bit deeper. And I said to myself, well, hey, since I already have Ansible installed because I use that to deploy OpenStack, why not just continue to keep leveraging Ansible? So that's kind of where we're going to go the next step and say, well, how can we operate our OpenStack clouds using Ansible? So, the first question that pops into your head is well, why Ansible with OpenStack? Why not, Chef or Puppet or SaltStack or any of those other guys? And don't get me wrong, I love those other configuration management tools as well. But for some reason, Ansible just made sense, and these are some of the reasons why it made sense to me. So with Ansible, the only thing you need is SSH and Python, right, on that target device in order to be able to manage and manipulate a target or a remote device. There is no agents, no clients, nothing else you need to install, and the fact that it can manage an environment of any size and type, right, as long as you meet those prerequisites of having SSH and Python on that device, right. So to me, in my background, I was an infrastructure support engineer for probably 15 years of my career, and installing agents and chasing down installs so that I can manage remote machines was basically a nightmare. So Ansible kind of alleviates all of that nightmare and takes it completely out the picture. And yes, Ansible can manage Windows machines as well. There are capability of leveraging PowerShell in Windows to be able to manage a Windows machine through Ansible. So all boxes have been checked in reference to being able to manage an environment using Ansible. So I think that's pretty cool. The other thing about Ansible that kind of jumped out to me is that it has a huge selection of modules that are based around overall Linux management and even OpenStack directly itself, right? So these modules are already created, they exist. You no longer have to write very intricate batch files to do Linux things, right? 9 times out of 10, if there's something in Linux that you want to do, there's an Ansible module that already exists to do it. And to me, it allows you the capability of being able to work with OpenStack like it's a complicated Linux kernel, right? So without you having to really know as much about OpenStack or know the API calls or all the CLI calls, leveraging those modules make your OpenStack management a lot easier. I do it in a bit unorthodox method. sometimes where I will go after the Python CLI instead of the APIs, but that's just my personal preference. But again, that was the next bullet point, is that your playbooks can be written against the OpenStack APIs or written against the CLI, OSC, OpenStack client if you want, right? So you have that choice of how you want to manage your OpenStack cloud. And that flexibility to me I've found to be great, because I can manage OpenStack Cloud that's on a public platform like Rackspace's public cloud. I can manage it using Ansible and make API calls and manage it just the same way as I can manage a private instance of OpenStack directly by using the CLI. Same function, same behavior, and I think that that's pretty cool to be able to do that. And then the last thing that to me that jumped out to me is that being able to designing roles with unique variables values, right? It's just as easy as writing an email. So Ansible, its basis is written off of YAML, right? So you can use YAML, and you can even write Ansible in JSON, which I don't think anybody really wants to do, but you could if you wanted to. But the basis of the way you write your Ansible code, your playbooks or your roles, is the YAML. To me, YAML happens to be one of the simplest markup languages and easiest to read, as a human. And to me, the fact that I can create a role and have unique variables just designated to that specific role, or I can have variables that are global, which affect all the playbooks that are sitting in the directory structure. There's a lot of options available there, and I just think that that's just a very neat thing to have. In this next slide, this is just meant to be a visual as to how I kind of look at the use of Ansible. So you have, your cloud operator at the top there, which would be either cloud admin local to your office, or a cloud operator being Rackspace as itself, because we have a managed support around our OpenStack Cloud, so we can be your cloud operator for you. But in either direction, you can directly use Ansible to be able to manage your OpenStack Cloud. And I have the DevOps sitting off to the left there, because Ansible code is DevOps code, right? It is a combination of a developer and an operations engineer kind of putting their heads together and coming out with automation code that allows you to manage your bare underlying infrastructure, as well as you can use Ansible to manage and deploy your applications on top of that, right? So it's like a one-stop shop. And then kind of going back down, looking at the Ansible logo and going back down, having the two different paths that you can follow, whether you can make write your Ansible code against the APIs, or whether you can write your Ansible code against the OpenStack CLI. It's absolutely your choice in the matter. And then, of course, you have our cloud consumer off to the side, who gets to reap all the great benefits of all that Ansible code that you wrote, and you can just keep repeating the same process over and over again. So this is my visual as to how this all can work. And Rackspace has proven that this to be very successful. We use Ansible to manage our customers' OpenStack clouds, and it has worked out very, very well overall. So let's get into some fun stuff, right? So what I've done is I prepared a few scenarios, real life scenarios, in my opinion, that can happen, and I want to be able to show how you can use Ansible to fulfill some of those real life scenarios, and and you let me, hopefully everything goes well, and I'll be able to show to you the power that you can have by using Ansible with your OpenStack Cloud. All right, so the first scenario, this type of scenario happens to be one of my favorites, right? So, how many of you, I'm sure, have seen something like this that, when you're in IT? So you have the business, right, in the marketing department. They decided to purchase a completely unbranded responsive website template for a special marketing campaign, right? I mean, of course, they did this without even asking the internal IT, because, quite honestly, they're moving faster than us a lot of times, right? So what they did is, after purchasing this, they immediately hired 10 new website developer contractors that were supposed to be adding branding to that website, and also adding some additional functionality. And so basically, the marketing department manager now walks up to you, who is the cloud operator, and says, you know what, I just hired these 10 developers. I need each of these developers to have their own area to be able to test out this website. So they need their own computing resources, and of course, I need that set up, by tomorrow, or even sometimes probably even today. So basically what you've been presented with was the idea that you need to create 10 new tenants or projects as they were called, and also 10 new users with the proper roles, and you need to be able to hand that over to that marketing department manager today or by tomorrow. Now, you of course could go in and do that manually, right? So there's nothing stopping you from going into Horizon, going in and actually doing that manually. But what I would prefer to do is I prefer to kind of show you a way of being able to do that without actually having to go in here and create 10 users, or without I have to go in here and create 10 projects. So I've logged into my test environment that I have here, OpenStack environment, and I logged in just to show you that under projects, these are the only 2 projects that exist, and under users, these are the only users that exist, right? So I don't want you to think that I have a rabbit up my sleeve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the command prompt here, and hopefully all of this is visible to you. I tried to make it as big as possible before it kind of goes off the screen for me. So what I did is right now I prepped the machine, right? So I'm on my deployment node, and I actually have an all-in-one running OSA. And so I'm on the machine. I brought down some Ansible playbooks and roles that I had created just for this demo here, right? And I'm in the directory where those Ansible playbooks and roles exist. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to execute a playbook that will do just what the manager asked, right? It will create 10 tenants or projects. It will create 10 users, and it will assign to those users the proper roles that they need. So let's get started. And hopefully this all goes as planned. So what I did is I executed the playbook called base.yaml. And what this playbook does, and the screen here will actually kind of step you through what it did, right? So first thing it did is it created a random password generator, right? Because the biggest thing with creating users is that now you have to figure out how to create all these unique passwords that meet certain expectations. All right, and no one, to me, like I said, I've lived the life of an infrastructure engineer, and that to me was very painful, right? So I basically installed a tool that'll do that for me, and then the next step in the process is that I had to create the users using that tool to create random passwords. Then the next thing is that I had to create the environments that I needed. The next step was that it assigned specific roles to those users, and at the very end, it spits out an output here that kind of something that you can literally copy and paste from your screen and provide to that marketing manager, right? So it created this user, Marketing Dev 01. It was added to Marketing Project 01 tenant, and it was assigned this password, right? So to go in and just make sure that I'm not tricking you guys, you'll now go in here and you'll now see that I created 10 projects. You'll now go in and see that I have the 10 users as well. All right. So what I'm going to do is before I move forward here, I'm just going to assign my admin user the ability to log into this particular project. Where did admin go? There it is. And that way I can kind of jump between the 2 tenants without having to do too much. And I'm just going to log out really quick and log back in. All right, so now that we have that, so that's the first scenario. And before I go any further, I actually need to make a really quick change to one of the variables, right? So the next playbook is going to be talking about being able to set quotas and things like that. So I want to be able to, you know what, I think I'll just wait. I'll wait to do that. Okay, so let's kind of jump into our next scenario. So our next scenario is this. So now that you've created, so those contractors, you handed over that environment to the marketing manager. Those contractors have gone and basically turned your cloud into community public cloud. They have consumed an enormous amount of resources. They've basically run wild, for lack of a better word. And now your resources usage are spiking through the roof. And you realize that, I need to go in and restrict these guys because they don't know how to respect my cloud, right? So Now you want to go in and basically apply some quotas or restrictions to the resources you provided them. Now typically that would have been something you did before you turned it over, but just for some reason today it kind of slipped your mind. So what we're going to do is we're going to allow 3 of the developers to have basically 30 vCPU and be able to spin up 30 instances. And then we want the rest of them just to be able to have 20 vCPU and 20 instances. So what this is a change to quotas, right? So what you would typically have to do is you would typically have to go in to Horizon and go in to each of the projects and change the quotas and step down that whole process, right? And you know, who wants to go in and do this 10 times, right? So what we did instead is that we created a very easy playbook that will go in and adjust those quotas for us. Now, before going into it, I just want to show you the variables around it and how we're going to set this up. So we're going to jump into the adjust quota folder, and then we're going to jump into the variables folder for that playbook, or that role actually, sorry. So you'll see here that for this role, I've created specific variables that are going to be fed into that role when it's executed, right? And you'll see here that I'm doing basically an array, that the first user will get 30, second user will get 30, third user will get 30. Now, marketing number 4 will get 20 and 20. Marketing number 5 will get 20 and 20, and so on and so forth, right? So it's an array. So this variable will match up to that variable, and so on and so forth, and go all the way down the line. So it's going to pull both those variables in at the same time and use them one at a time and kind of and rapidly go through all of the 10 users. So I just want to kind of show that to you there. And again, these playbooks are available on GitHub in my repository. So they're here if you ever want to use them for your own personal use, as well as I just released a book called Administering OpenStack with Ansible, and these very playbooks are also part of the book as well. So you can also buy my book if you're interested in learning some more about Ansible and OpenStack and how you can use the two together. But for now, let's move on and execute this next playbook. Oh, see, at least you know this is a live demo. All right, so what this next playbook is going to go in is it's going to go in and basically adjust the quotas to each of these tenants accordingly. And we'll jump in and we'll actually try to log into one of the tenants just so that you can see that it actually did what it said it was supposed to do. So we're just going to log out of this guy. We're going to go to sorry about that. MRT. -006. We got password. Okay, so if we go in here, you should see now that our quotas have been changed, right? So remember, we made the change to only allow vCPU of 20 and 10 instances. Again, pretty trivial in the big scheme of things, but this is something that you actually will do a lot of as the cloud operator in adjusting quotas. And if you have a playbook where you can just feed in some variables and very quickly make changes and execute it, it'll take you a long way being able to do that. Oh, okay. Well, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but we'll, all right. Cool. So I guess we'll just stay in our tenant for now. I think I'm getting locked out of my own cloud. All right. So let's move on to our last scenario. So within our last scenario, so things went as we all expected, right? So as the time passed, the marketing department has decided that all those contractors that they had really were bad, didn't know really what they were doing, so they decided to fire them all. Go figure, right? So the direction from the marketing manager is that before you destroy their environments, they want you to basically back up the instances from one of the tenants, just in case that actual contractor they had hired maybe did something that was beneficial and they need to bring back at a later date. So your next task is now you need to snapshot all the instances from one of the projects and then destroy all the users and tenants that you just created, right? So again, think of the process around going into Horizon now and going in and having to delete all the tenants, having to take the snapshots of all the instances that live in one of the tenants, having to delete all the users and make sure that everything is cleaned up, right? So quite honestly, it's not a fun thing to do manually. So why not go in and make it easy for yourself and create a user playbook to do it? So before we do that, I'm going to log into Tenant Marketing Project 1, and we're just going to launch some instances really quickly just so that we have actually something to snapshot, and then you'll be able to see the end result of that. So we're just going to create a few instances here. Sorry, from image. We're going to just use Churro, something really quick and easy. We're just going to I'll use this network here, and all should be well in the world. So we're just going to launch these instances really quickly before getting rid of everything. All right, those instances are up and running here. So we're going to pop back over to our admin project, and then we're going to go back here, and we're going to execute destroy environment. Well, actually, what we're going to do is, so with destroy environment, it happens to be one of the unique playbooks where, in a sense, that you actually have to pass variables in line to be able to do what you want with it. And the reason why that, and I'll paste it here, and hopefully it won't enter. Okay, good, it didn't enter. The reason for that is that it didn't feel right to me to be able to create a playbook that will destroy an environment and that will just go out and span the whole cloud and destroy everything, right? That just didn't feel right to me. And despite the fact that you can feed it variables in a variable file, it felt better to be able to pass those variables right on the command line so you can see exactly what you're entering and exactly what's going to be removed. So with this playbook, destroy environment, you actually have to pass those extra variables, and that by the -- extra vars, and you feed in what you want it to do. So right with this one, I'm going to destroy the marketing project 01 project and remove the marketing dev 01 user. So I'm going to do this one by itself, and then I'm going to paste in the command to do it for all the other environments, right? So you see with this playbook, the first thing it did is it retrieved the tenant ID. It then used that tenant ID to be able to pull back all the instances and their IDs that are running in that tenant. It then took a snapshot of those instances based off the instance ID. It then took out and retrieved the tenant ID again and basically took that to be able to destroy the tenant. And before destroying the tenant, of course, it deleted the instances that are part of that tenant. And then the very last step was it deleted that user, right? So if we go in here now and, well, you know what? Before we do that, I'll paste the rest of these guys in there, and then we'll come back and look to see if it did what it was supposed to do, right? So we'll let this guy run for a second. So now if we go into identity and we go into projects, you'll see that project 01 is gone. And what you'll also notice is that under images now, we will now have additional snapshots, right? So we took a snapshot, the two snapshots of those instances it took there. Before deleting it. I'm not sure why exactly it didn't get that third snapshot, so I have to check into that. But it did snapshot the two instances there that existed, and it made those snapshots available for the future. And checking back here where we are with that, so we got two more tenants to go, and we should have basically a clean environment back to where we started first when we kicked off these scenarios. So almost there. We're working on 10. We're going to do 10. So if we go back in here under identity, we should find that all our projects are gone. All our users are gone. All that's left was the snapshot that we created under images, and life is great. So again, these three scenarios, while being very simple and straightforward, are real-life scenarios that you will face as a cloud operator, without a question. And the idea of having something under your sleeve where you can do this in an automated fashion just makes your life a lot easier and simpler. And it also, to me, reduces the amount of mistakes that can happen when dealing and managing your cloud. And one of the things that always stood out to me is that doing knowledge transfer, knowledge handoff, right? You have a new engineer that comes in and is now a cloud operator. Instead of having to teach him all of these things and get him up to speed, you literally can hand over playbooks and roles that they can leverage. Now, they can examine those playbooks and learn the details they need themselves, but in the meantime, they can use them to enable themselves to be independent and actually handle tasks on their own. So again, it's a little bit of a cultural thing, and to me, it actually encourages new members to the team to be able to learn something new as well. So before we conclude here, we're just going to review some of the tips and tricks around deploying OSA that I found to be very useful, as I've been dealing with it since it was released, and I found that there's just certain ways of going about it that makes your life easier. So the first thing that I want to share is that when deploying OSA, I would always recommend using the tag versions instead of the actual repository versions, right? So in GitHub, you have the ability of looking at it as a repository version, or you can look at the tags associated with the version. Always use the tags. I find that to be very straightforward, very easy to be able to reference exactly what you deployed, as well as you can deploy a version that's maybe one or two old backwards in time. And that, to me, removes the possibility of you taking on some new code that was just, put in the repository and maybe not working as best as possible, right? So I always go one or two versions behind what the latest version is at the time. Check out the GitHub repository for new versions and variables that are being introduced, right? So because it is an open source project, it continuously is changing. Things are being improved. Things are being added. Sometimes new variables are added to those variable files that need to be fed in to deploy OSA. And if you don't have them in the configuration files that you have saved in the machine, your installation won't work, right? So you do need to check back into GitHub every once in a while and make sure that your variable files or configuration files haven't been updated, new things haven't been added, right? So that's just one thing. Triple check your networking setup. And when I say triple check, quadruple check, check it 10 times, 20 times, right? The biggest fail that we found when deploying OSA is the fact that customers or individuals do not have that network set up properly, right? You need to have those three namespaces and bridges set up before you start your OSA installation. Is an absolute must, and there's more details in the installation guide that can show you exactly how you need to set up those bridges and network namespaces. Redeployment steps, right? So the cleanup process. If you ever deploy OSA and you want to do it again and you want to start from scratch, you do need to run a cleanup process, right? Because what happens in the process of OSA is that you actually are creating containers that have the OpenStack services running in it. Unless you do remove those containers manually and remove all other bits that were brought in to do that OSA install, when you go to run it again, it will actually use what's already there. It won't actually start fresh and clean, right? So there are playbooks out there in the playbooks folder that will actually clean up your environment and destroy your containers and make sure that everything starts clean and fresh so you can do the deployment again. I would highly recommend using that cleanup playbooks to clean up your environment before installing OSA again. It is a much better way of going about it. There's also a health check playbook that exists out there for Galera. So because Galera is being used with MariaDB to have a multi-node cluster for your back-end data store for your OpenStack services, where every once in a while one of those clusters fall off or they get out of sync, right? There's actually a playbook out there that will do a health check of your Galera cluster to make sure that all your cluster nodes are alive and available and in sync. Definitely recommend using that. And if you're not sure exactly where to find that, you can ping me and I can send you exactly where that is. Or if you brought my book, there's actually details around that in there as well, and the exact code that you would use to be able to do Galera health check, as well as health check for your other infrastructure components such as RabbitMQ and et cetera, et cetera. And last but not least, on my tip and trick is running your playbooks with -L, right? So -L is basically tells your Ansible playbook to limit to a specific machine, right, or a specific host that you want to. I cannot tell you enough how much that has saved my bacon. So within your host file, you may have a list of machines that you want to be able to manage. But then you may find that when you run your installation, one of those machines just didn't complete the playbook properly, it errored out for whatever reason. If you use the same command with -L and you put in the name of that host or the IP address of that host that you want specifically that playbook to run on, it will only run on that host, right? So -L with Ansible is a lifesaver overall, and it's definitely a lifesaver when deploying OSA. All right, so we're going to conclude here with just giving you some links to some reference material. The OSA installation guide is out there on the openstack.org website. Rackspace as well. We have a private cloud installation guide with using OSA, which to me is a little bit more detailed around what you need to do to prep to have OSA and the install process. So that exists there on Rackspace website. There's also an all-in-one installation guide out on the OpenStack website, and of course you can keep track of OSA as far as its updates and any news around it on the OpenStack website as well. So thank you for hanging out with me here. Hopefully some of this stuff is very beneficial to you or beneficial in some way. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or an email if you have any questions or comments. And overall, I just want to thank you and open it up now for some questions, some Q&A.
Thank you, Walter. I will read you some questions from the chat function. If you have not submitted your questions yet, please feel free to keep adding them. We will hopefully get to as many as possible. If we don't get to yours, we will try to follow up with an answer. Okay, question number 1, Walter. When deploying OSA, are you still deploying a trunk version of OpenStack, or is it proprietary?
Oh, yeah, no, that's a really good question. I'm sorry I didn't mention that before. So OSA incorporates and is leveraging OpenStack trunk. So, and what I mean by that is that when you're deploying OSA, you're deploying the code that comes directly out of the OpenStack community that is put out there for general consumption. You're not consuming something that is proprietary. You're not consuming something that it will pin you into a specific vendor or pin you into a specific way of doing things. So it is not proprietary. It is the same as installing OpenStack directly from the trunk that's out there on GitHub, right? So it's not proprietary. And that's one of the things I love about OSA is that it is still using the trunk code and not going off into a specific deployment model.
Great. Next question. What is the most common issue you have seen when deploying OSA?
So I kind of mentioned that before during the webinar as well, is that the most common issue that we find when deploying OSA is that the network bridges and namespaces are not set up and available. It is highly important that you take some time out. And anyone who's dealt with OpenStack knows that the networking component is a big piece of it, and not just for Neutron's sake, but just in the sake of having your infrastructure nodes communicate properly with each other, having them be able to communicate properly with the computing nodes, and et cetera, et cetera. So having that network set up is one of the most common issues we find when individuals are trying to deploy OSA. So definitely look back at these reference materials. To make sure that you have it set up as good as possible before deploying your OSA. Great.
The next question is a two-parter. First part, when creating Ansible playbooks, do you utilize the OpenStack modules? And the second part of that question is, what version of Ansible are you using?
Cool. So admittingly, I will say, and anyone who's also read my book will know that I do not use the OpenStack modules that are there with Ansible, and I'll explain why. At the time of when I started charting down these borders with Ansible and OpenStack, the modules that were present were not up to date to the current versions that are available with OpenStack, right? They were written for earlier versions of OpenStack, and what that did is that limited me with the amount of functionality that I could do or use against my OpenStack Cloud. And if anyone who knows me knows that I cannot stand having limited functionality. If there's functionality available, I want it all. So what I decided to do is, instead of using the Ansible modules with OpenStack, I decided to write my OpenStack code to leverage the OpenStack CLI. And what that gave me is that gave me my full capability, all of my functionality. Yes, I had to write a little bit more code, and yes, I had to understand the OpenStack CLI a little bit better. But at the end of the day, I had my full suite of options that are available to me to manage my OpenStack Cloud. And I think right now I'm using Ansible version 1.9. I know I should be using 2.0. I haven't transitioned over to 2.0 yet. Actually, I'm going to be spending some time in the next few weeks right here, because as the summit is approaching, to kind of get things moved over to leverage Ansible 2.0, because there's a huge amount of additional functionality that was added with 2.0, and I want to start jumping in and playing with that.
Awesome. And you mentioned the summit. Rackspace will actually be at the summit this year in Austin, so feel free to stop by if you have more questions.
Yep.
Okay, next question. Can you share some of the most common issues Rackspace has uncovered when operating OpenStack Cloud?
It's a funny thing, right? So, it varies, and it all depends. To me, that believe it or not, that no host found error that you get out of Nova happens to be probably one of the most common ones that we find. And believe it or not, that can be associated with a lot of things in reference to OpenStack Cloud. If you have Neutron misconfigured, it'll give you that error message. If you have Nova not running, it'll give you that error message. If Keystone authentication is not set up properly amongst the machines, meaning your service accounts for OpenStack services, it'll give you that message. So that's probably, to me, the one that stands out the most. The second piece of the puzzle, as I mentioned also through the webinar, is that your Galera cluster, right? You lose a node in the cluster and you don't know it, and now you have you're getting different responses based on which node, which control plane it hits, because based off of whether or not the Galera cluster is up on that node or not. So watching your infrastructure components like RabbitMQ and Galera are the bigger pieces, and of course, like I said, that Nova, keeping your eye on Nova and all its dependent services is probably the things that jump out to me the most.
Great. This question was in relation to the first scenario you went through. The question is, how much time did it take to create that playbook for marketing?
Right. So, for me, it didn't take long, because I'm very fortunate to be able to have a lot of time to be able to experiment, really learn the OpenStack CLI, really learn OpenStack and figure out ways that are beneficial. I would say that at a rough, it maybe took me 2 to 3 hours, right? So if it took me 2 to 3 hours to create that playbook that I can now reuse over and over again in any way that I want, versus having to spend maybe an hour. It maybe have taken me an hour to create those users by hand, right? And I have to do that every time, so that's an hour every time I have to create users, versus you spend 2 to 3 hours one time, and then after that it's seconds. But as you start to use Ansible, and if you're familiar with the OpenStack CLI, it gets to be easier and easier over time. And my gut instinct right now is to break open my text wrangler and show you the code and show you how simple it is. I'm gonna fight that urge right now. I'm just gonna encourage you to go out and check out my GitHub repository. All the stuff is there, And if that doesn't work for you, I would definitely encourage you to check out my book. It's on Amazon, and it'll step you through literally line for line of how I created that playbook and that role and why I did what, and give you that uncovered knowledge that I have within 189 pages.
Awesome. I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Sure.
Next one. Is there a way to record actions into a script?
So I'm not sure exactly, I guess, what you mean by that. Is it more around being able to audit what that script did, the actions it did, and then get the responses written back to you or written back to them? If that was the question, then yes, you can. Ansible actually has a really good way of doing an audit as to what it did. I didn't show you that, but it actually is written to a separate log, which you can audit and review. And you can even have your auditors review, right, to be able to know what is being done to an environment, who did what. Ansible, of course, will write anything out to the screen that you want it to as an output. So yes, there are ways of being able to kind of record the tasks that were executed and the response that came back from the remote host that you ran it on.
Great. I hope that answered their question. Okay, and then the last one. And again, if we did not get to your question, we apologize, and we will try to follow up with you. Or you can find us at the OpenStack Summit, and you can always email Walter at walter.bentley@rackspace.com or ping him on his Twitter. Last question. Are there any good tools that you have used to deploy Ubuntu 14.0 on bare metal nodes to prepare hosts for OSA deployment?
Yeah, so this is always a fun question, right? Because I've tried many methods. I can't say, all right, I'll say it this way. There's two that jump out to me, one that my coworker absolutely loves and one that I've found to make work. So during the Vancouver Summit, I actually took part in a competition called Rule the Stack. And the idea of that competition was that you had to build an OpenStack Cloud, multi-node OpenStack Cloud on bare metal as fast as you possibly could, right? And they gave you nothing but the bare metal machines and connection to them over out of band. So for that competition, I actually used MAS and Bluetooth MAS, MAAS. I know. Any of you who have used MAS, you probably can say it's not exactly the most friendliest thing to use in the world. But I found that the Bluetooth MAS does work with small cluster of servers. And can be and you can do it actually very successfully if you get the right version of MAS installed. So I guess my recommendation around that is that if you're going to use MAS, make sure you update the repository to pull down the newest version of MAS. Don't use the one that will come with and that Ubuntu will bring down as a default, because that version of it is not the latest and greatest. And I found that using the latest and greatest version of MAS gets you to a better place. So Ubuntu MAS. The second one, which is my coworker loves this one, is Cobbler. So my coworker has actually developed a whole bunch of Cobbler scripts that will deploy Ubuntu onto bare metal, and he absolutely loves it. My coworker's name is James Thorne, and he actually has a blog out there in the world too, where he has some information on how you can use Cobbler to deploy Ubuntu 14.04.
Great. I think that puts us at time.
Well, thank you. So thank you, everyone, again, for the great questions. If I didn't get to answer your question, feel free to email me, hit me up on Twitter, come see me at the Austin Summit. I'll be there. I'll be in the Rackspace booth, as well as I have a few workshops scheduled. So I'll be around, so feel free to find me. But thank you again, and hopefully this information was useful.